So during the keynote, Roland and Adrian mentioned about the 4D Write Pro widget. And Angelo also mentioned about the quick report, the new quick report, and the label editor. And one thing they all mentioned was that the new stuff are all written in pure 4D code. And something else that was mentioned during the keynote was that the 4D language is now going to be preemptive, multi-threaded. So you can see the language has really come a long way. And you might really be asking yourself, well, who needs plugins? And you know what? That is a very good question. And if you go to the documentation, one of the things I often get asked is that there's no documentation for 4D plugins, the plugin SDK that is. And that's not true. The documentation is online. This is the latest current documentation. It says version 2003, but the information is valid and it still applies. So that's the documentation. And it really starts by asking the question, well, why the need for a plugin? And in short, it says, well, you might need a plugin for special user interface, or a private, or something very specific to the application. And it also talks about what is a plugin. Well, a plugin is something that accomplishes typically a feature that 4D in itself cannot handle. Or it might be able to handle technically, but it'll be a lot of work to implement using just the language. Or it might be something that can only be possible using the C or C++ language. So over the years, I've been writing a few plugins, and most of them are available online and free to download. And today's presentation is really about what's out there, how to find what might benefit you, and how to use them. And by the way, my name's Keisuke Miyako, and I work for 4D Japan. Four parts. Part one, what is GitHub? Now, you could go online or even buy a book that addresses this question, what is GitHub? And the answer you'll typically get would be something like, well, Git and GitHub are two different things. They all say that. And that Git is a distributed source control system, and that GitHub is a repository hosting service. And then they will typically go on and on with the technical details. But honestly, as 4D developers, that's not really the point. That is not important. For me, what is important is that GitHub is, by large, the largest host of source code in the world. Simply, it's most popular. And part of its popularity, I suppose, is the easy user interface and just the friendliness of its web application. What can you do? Well, you can freely browse, so you don't even have to create an account or pay money to look for a project, and you can download a project, again, without logging in or without even a special software. You can just use a web browser to get the project on your computer. And that's in contrast with what used to be a very popular way of hosting source code, something like SVN, for example, that will typically require you to create an account, install a software, or maybe use the command line, and was really complicated, relatively speaking. Now, I started using GitHub around 2012. Now, back in 2010, at the San Diego summit, part of the keynote was actually that we've started a new repository. The URL was sources.40.com, and it was announced that all my work that previously used to be posted on the forums or elsewhere are going to be hosted in a centralized manner and managed on this site. And now this site was using two pieces of software, what's called a track for project management, and also SVN for version control. And which was nice. It was a very solid decision back then, and still is, I suppose. But one of the problems was that developers kind of found the threshold to be a bit high. That is, you had to install a special software, especially on Windows, but also on Mac actually, and then just to find a project and download the software in a way that you can use immediately in your project wasn't that so straightforward. That was 2010. And then really, SVN, well, you can kind of deduct from the description, but these are really professional tools for project management. Many developers working on various parts of a large software, but it was kind of an overkill for what we were aiming to do, which was simply to publish and share code. It was an overkill. So, 4 years ago, 2012, I created an account on GitHub and started posting my new stuff on GitHub, and also migrating some of my old stuff to this new location. This sources.40.com, the old site is still online, but I really haven't been very active on that site. Most of my activity has pretty much moved to GitHub. And this is where I would publish, share, and maintain my code. What's interesting about GitHub, other than the popularity and the friendly user interface, is that it has a kind of a social face. Here's a screenshot of what's displayed on the bottom left corner of a GitHub homepage. It tells you how many people are following a particular account and how many projects I am following. And there's a kind of a nice social interaction between developers and just sharing knowledge, sharing resources, and that's kind of part of the fun of working on GitHub. Anytime I would post a new project on GitHub or update something up there, if you follow me on GitHub, so you have to create an account and then log in, and then you can follow anybody, you would automatically get a notification that something has been updated on this repository. Or I might tweet about something I've done on a GitHub project. So that's GitHub. The point is that, yes, it's a very smart technology. There's a lot of things to learn about Git itself and GitHub, but for the purpose of this presentation, all I wanted to, the point is that it's a social network for developers where people can freely share their code and have fun. Part 2 is about finding a project on GitHub. So my URL would be github.com/Miyako, M-I-Y-A-K-O, and you'll be directed to a page that looks something like this on the screen. And then what you do is you click on a tab named Repositories, which will give you a list of all the repositories that's been posted under this account. Currently, there are more than 250 projects on Miyako, so you can just filter a project to find whatever you're looking for. And once you find a project that seems interesting, what you typically do is you click on the download button. To do this, you don't have to be logged in. You can just browse in as an anonymous user, and clicking this button will give you a zip archive of the entire project. There's another button, which is the icon of a screen with a downward-looking arrow, and that is for cloning a project. And this button would only work if you're actually logged in as a GitHub user. So there's the difference. Free download or cloning as a GitHub developer. I've been following some naming conventions on whatever I post on GitHub. So there are 5 large categories. There's plugins, there's components, there's widgets, and there's some other stuff. So what's the difference between a plugin and a component? Well, both are modules, generic modules that you can use in multiple projects. The difference is the language. Plugins are written in C, and they're compiled. A component is written in 4D language, and well, that's just the main difference. The difference between those and a widget is that a widget is a user interface, and it is strongly recommended in 4D that you try to create a user interface using the 4D language, not C. It's all right to write a plugin which doesn't have a user interface in C. Those kinds of projects are pretty much portable from one version to another. It doesn't really change. However, the user interface is really tightly integrated, and it tends to be dependent on a particular version that was intended for, so you could have some issues during migration. So I would, actually, I don't think I've ever written a user interface plugin or up to today. Everything is just a function, and the widgets are written in 4D. In your USB key, you will find a PDF document, 15 pages, that lists all the plugins, just the plugins, that are currently published on GitHub, with a short description, the last modified date, and the platforms, the compatible platforms. Well, it's easier to actually see it being done, so I'm going to log into my own GitHub page. This is a slightly different page to what you saw on the previous slide, because I'm logged in as myself. So the repository list is on the bottom right corner, and nevertheless, I can just find a project. So here I typed in TESS, and I got one project, which is the Tesseract. It's an OCR, optical character recognition plugin, and I'm going to its page. Like I said, I can either click download zip, and the download would start immediately. It won't be too long. Meanwhile, I could just download something else. Let's go for a widget. Like I said, because of the naming convention, if I know I'm looking for a widget, I could just simply type in widget, and then give me the list will be filtered to all the widgets. For example, this one seems interesting, widget countdown. Again, the explanation's in Japanese, but anyway, download. That was quick. And the other one's finished as well. Because it's a zip file, there's no special software needed to unarchive it. And then typically for a widget, what you find is that you find one database, which is a host database containing the widget as a component. This could be confusing at first. I'm going to open the packages, and there, inside the components folder, is the actual widget. So I can either open this using 4D to see the source code. There, it's all non-compiled, interpreted code. Or I could just run the host database to just get a glimpse of what the component actually does. Now, I kind of using the word component and widget interchangeably. Widget is a component with a user interface. That's the difference. Typically, there's only one or two methods and one or two forms, just to prove the point. This widget happens to be a timer where the user is prompted to type in something within a time limit. If they move to another field, then the timer is resetted. But the thing is, if I keep the form on unattended for a certain time period, then it automatically cancels out. And that's what it does. Again, I suppose the point here is that if you download a widget or a component from GitHub, then don't keep in mind that what you've downloaded could be a host database containing the widget, and the actual gem of the project could be inside the package in the components folder. Now, about the Tesseract plugin. It's already listed in the PDF, but what it does is it's optical character recognition. It contains English and Spanish data. In other words, it can read English and Spanish text as provided as a picture, and you can extend it to support more languages by adding files. What you would typically look at, other than the brief explanation, is the platform. I would typically list 4 platforms: Windows 32 bits, Windows 64 bits, Carbon, and Cocoa. As you've heard already, 4D is shifting towards releasing all the current software, the 4D and 4D server software suite in as Cocoa products in 64 bits only. There's no 32-bit Cocoa. Cocoa is always 64, and in contrast, Carbon is going to be limited to 32 bits, and that's going to be maintained for the foreseeable future, but there's going to be very limited new features to be expected in this branch. So what I'm trying to do with all my plugins is to, especially the ones that are popular, to support at least Cocoa on Mac and 64 bits on Windows. Now, if I look at the Tesseract plugin, you can see that it was all right for Windows, 32 and 64 already supported, but when I posted it initially back in 2014, there were no Cocoa versions of 4D or 4D server for that matter. So I didn't support 64 bits, which is a concern because you might be thinking, is this plugin going to be maintained? Is it going to die out? Unless there's a real technical barrier to deprecate, to not support a plugin, then I really am motivated to keep on updating these plugins to be viable for 64 bits as well, which is actually what I've done with this Tesseract plugin. So on my computer, I've already got a 64-bit version of the plugin. I just compiled it this morning, actually. And here I have the 64-bit preview version of 4D Desktop. And if this database runs on 64 bits, then it means that the plugin's 64-bit ready. The way this plugin works is that you provide it with an image. So there's a sample image in the resources folder. I think I'm using the JPEG. So there it is. This is a scanned photograph of a typed passage. It's slightly diagonal, but anyway. And the point is that whether the plugin is going to be able to recognize this as text. And you can see some accent characters over here, and that can be interesting. Now I'm going to carry on. And this is what I get. So it's tried, and it's got basically the simple characters. So you can see that it's correctly got most of the characters, but not all. For example, this bit was actually a C with a diacritical mark, but actually it's been wrongly recognized as an R. And the reason for that is that I didn't specifically tell the library that the text is Spanish. And the way this library works is that you can tell which language is most likely to be, and then it will do a better job at recognizing the characters. So this time, oh no. So this time it correctly got the accent over the 8, but still there were some characters like the $ has been wrongly recognized as a file. So, the point is that this library it does a decent job, but it might not be super accurate. But that's kind of the limitation of the library. Anyway, the point is that the plugin is now working in 64 bits. Now, what I can do is to update my repository. Now, this you don't have to know. It's just giving you a glimpse of what happens behind the scenes. So, where was I? So currently on my home page, I have an explanation, a list of commands, and it clearly says that Cocoa is not supported, and that's about it. Now I've updated my plugins. I'm going to say now, Cocoa support, and commit, and at the same time, I'm going to update my wiki to say it's not very good at emoticons. Cocoa is supported as well. File could not be edited. So it's probably been locked because I'm uploading the files behind the scenes, I think. And then let's try again. There's something about this network, I think, that GitHub doesn't like. Anyway, I'm going to do that later in my room. And then what I would do is, well, actually, I should wait until the actual page is updated for, and then I would probably tweet about it. So that's how plugins will be maintained on my side. But as a user, what you need to know is that by clicking the download button, you get the whole repository. It's pretty simple if it's a component because there's a single database, and inside it is the actual component. It can be quite tricky if it is a plugin, because the nature of GitHub is that you get the entire repository, and which includes all the C files and the projects, and it's confusing. Where is the actual plugin? Well, the plugin is actually inside this sample database. You can open the package or go inside the folder and find the plugin and grab that plugin and install it in your own project. Now, the question is how to use that plugin. One thing that might be useful to know is that all of the plugins you will find on my GitHub repository follow a specific layout of files. So here's the anatomy of a plugin project. So typically there will be a root folder. The screenshot is an example from a plugin called JSON. And next, adjacent to that folder will be a README file, which is actually the file I was trying to update on the browser just a few moments ago. This is the description page of the project that will be published on GitHub. .md stands for Markdown. It's a simplified form of HTML. It has some basic styling and some enumerations and stuff just to make the text more structured. So that is just an explanation. And then what you have are the data files for the SDK. To create a plugin, one would use a special 4D structure. It's an application written in 4D, which will export all the projects files needed to compile a plugin. And these files, it's just a data file, contains the command name and the constant name and all the argument list of a command in a binary format. Well, not the result is a binary format, but it contains all the source material to create that file. And these data files will be necessary if you want to, say, add a new command to a plugin or want to change an argument to the command. In other words, unless you are a plugin developer, you can just ignore these. And then there are some project files which are, again, for plugin developers. These are required to compile a plugin using the native developer tools. So there's some files for Visual Studio, and there's one file for Xcode. Again, you can ignore these. And then there are all the source code, the C code and the headers, and some plugins will typically have an include folder and a lib folder, which are folders that contain a library, an open source library typically, that the plugin has a dependency on. Again, you can ignore these. The only thing you need to know is that there is a sample database, a 4D database with the 4D base extension, and if the project happens to have a V11 folder, that means that the top level structure is a Cocoa version. In other words, you can only use this plugin using 4D V14 or above, because this new architecture, which doesn't use Mac resource files, was only introduced in V14. So V14, 15, 15R, or 16 to come. And then the V11 folder contains a Carbon version of the same plugin, which you can use on Windows 64 bits, Macintosh, not just V11, it goes all the way up to V15 or 16, just not 64 bits. So don't be distracted by the name of the folder, which says V11. It doesn't mean that the plugin is limited to V11. There's no versioning technically for a plugin. It's just that the architecture has changed in V14. Well, it changed once in V11 for Unicode, and then it changed again in V14 for Cocoa. So that's the only reason why I could have put something like V11 and above. But anyway, V11 means 11 and above. You can use the same for V15 or 14. So V11 folder contains the Carbon edition. So what's the difference between a non-Carbon or Cocoa edition and the Carbon edition? As I've already mentioned, the Cocoa version will only work with V14 or above. And there is a slight difference in the platform threshold, which is that the Carbon edition can work on OS 10.6 or 10.7, but the other one would only work for 10.8 or and above. No difference on the Windows side. So that was the content of a plugin project. Now, I've listed some frequently asked questions. I think I've got 3 or 4, and let's go through them. So I think by far this is the most asked question, that there's no documentation. Why? Well, it's not like I'm trying to be mean or anything. It's just that I don't particularly find the work of documenting to be enjoyable. And that's all. Yes. But it's not that. And again, but if only I can be motivated to do, then sure. For example, some plugins are more popular than the other. And it's just, what's the point in writing a full documentation if nobody's using it? Yeah. But then it works anyway. If there's no documentation, who's going to use the plugin? So it's kind of a vicious circle. What you can do, though, is that you can find a automatically generated documentation. It's not that comprehensive, but it can still find a minimal amount of information. And because it's automatically generated, at least the information is accurate. So no typos or anything. It's based on the source project, so all the command names, the arguments, the argument types are accurate. I'll give you an example. So just a few moments ago, I was using the Tesseract plugin, wasn't I? Whenever you open a database with a plugin installed, with a downloaded plugin installed, there will be an entry in the help menu which looks like this. They're all the same. You get the name of the plugin and a list of the commands by theme. In this example, I've only got one theme, OCR. and it tells you that the first argument is text and the result is a long integer. Well, which isn't particularly helpful, especially when the command is, doesn't specifically suggest what the arguments should be. Like 3 arguments, 1, 2, read image. Well, which is why there is a sample database, so you can find a use case of the command, and then you find out, the first argument is a file path, and the third is the text. So it's going to be an output argument. You receive the text here, and then the third one was actually a language. But how do you know? If sometimes what happens is that the V14 version, because I normally do the testing on V15, and contains some example code, like the one you just see here, but the V11 version might not have any sample code. But it's the same plugin, so if you could just grab a demo version or an actual version of V14 and open the V14 or V15 version of the sample database, then you can find some additional sample code there. Something else you could do is actually go inside the source code. And I'm not asking you to analyze the C++ code, or it's very rarely C++ actually, it's more C anyway. The thing is that the source code might reveal some information that are, that was a red herring, not present in the automatically generated documentation. I'm going to enlarge the text. I think I can do this. And then if I jump to a particular function that I'm interested to use, let's say read image, that's it. Then just by reading the source code, the variable names, it might give you a hint as to what the actual parameter is supposed to be. A language comes from the third parameter. This is the image file path, this is the first parameter, and so on. It's just, I mean, by necessity, you might have to do something like this. So you can have a look at the documentation, the HTML version, or you could actually open up one of the source code, the CPP files, and then try to see if there's anything you can deduct from the variable names. And there might be some comments as well, more clues. Of course, I'm not, like I said, I'm not trying to, be, I don't know what's the word, pedantic, cruel or anything. It's just that I just couldn't find the time to do the documentation. And if somebody is open to the idea of helping out on a project, then actually that would be very much welcome. Because that, again, if you think about it, that's the whole point of GitHub. It's a social thing. Somebody does the coding, somebody else does the reading, and that's how a project is maintained. Let's say you find a bug, or the plugin's not working as expected. The standard way to report a bug on GitHub is to create what is called an issue. So you go back to the GitHub page. This time you need an account. So you're not just downloading as an anonymous user. You log in as a GitHub user, and then you can click on Issues. And I would prefer to be notified of a problem via a GitHub issue than being sent an email directly. It's not that I'm going to ignore emails, it's just that there's some practical advantages to using this feature. Well, it's a standard GitHub feature, and as you'll see in the following slides, you can upload images, you can style the text, and you will receive well, I will receive an email automatically whenever somebody's created an issue, and on my side, I can just reply to that issue, and then that reply would automatically be logged on the website as well. So there's a nice integration with the emails. And past discussions are logged, so you can go through the history if needed. And then even if an issue is closed, the closed issues are not visible on the page, but you can always switch to display all issues, closed or open, and then that keeps a nice history of how the project's been developed. So here's some screenshots. First, you click on issues, and then there's a link that says you can create an issue, so you click on that. And there's an editor. It's a web editor. It works on the browser. What's interesting about this editor is that if you want to post an image, you can simply drag and drop an image directly from your desktop to the edit area. So there's no you don't even have to click an upload button or anything. You just drag and drop, submit, and then the host, the project manager, would receive a nice HTML email with the attachments, and then, like I said, I can reply to that email, then you'll get a reply, and the conversation will be published online as well. Feature request. So let's say there's no, well, it's not a problem, but you have some, you feel you have some missing features, or you might have some ideas to make a project become even more useful. This time, again, you can use issues. So issues is not necessarily about a problem. It could be a constructive criticism, or it can be a feature request. Why not? You can create an issue. Or if you're not particularly keen to the idea of creating a GitHub account, or maybe you want to keep that, you don't want to have that conversation published on the web, then again, you can communicate through conventional channels. You can send a direct message via Twitter, or make a comment on the NUG, or even the forums. Those channels I try to check regularly, so any of these, whichever is convenient for you. Now, I'm not going to make any promises, but just because there's a feature request doesn't mean that it's going to be realized the next day or anything, but why not? I'm open to ideas. A request that can be realized is typically meets several conditions. First, it's possible. I mean, it's not an impossible request, and the amount of work required to code that is in a reasonable range. And if it's technically interesting, that I might be motivated to work on it. And if it's a kind of feature that would benefit the wider community rather than a specific project or specific individual, then those kinds of requests are more likely to be accepted or embraced. On the other hand, let's say you have a particular need. Maybe you want to communicate to a peripheral, or you have, or maybe you've inherited a project that's dependent on a plugin that doesn't work anymore on the latest version of 4D, and then you have some time constraints and you have a budget, and then you might need some help with the maintaining that plugin. So it's not something that you can leave to chance, like a feature request. You need specific, you have some expectations for this. In that case, you can submit, let's say, an order, a bespoke development work, similar to what was mentioned in the keynote, actually, with regard to the professional services, but it's more a small-scale thing. And then you could file a formal order for some customization or some maintenance work, or to create completely new stuff for your needs. One thing is the technical constraint is that for plugins, the development has to be in C, C++, or Objective-C. In other words, C#, the .NET language, is very difficult to port to a 4D plugin. Actually, I've never been successful. There's some fundamental memory management conflicts that prevents this from being used in 4D. There might be some workarounds, but I'm not really comfortable with those kinds of requirements. But otherwise, I'm very happy to look into whatever the plugin development is. Now, somebody asked about Swift language. I haven't done anything in Swift, so I don't know. But typically, anything that's possible in Swift should be possible in Objective-C. So it's just the language preference. Swift is just so much optimized for iOS development. So it makes sense to use that language for a mobile development. But I'm not sure if it makes a real, well, it should make a compiling difference anyway, even with the desktop development. But I'll be hard-pressed to believe that something must be in Swift. So how do you do that? Well, first, it's not going to be free. This is just my business manager requiring this to be a professional thing. So sorry. And so if you're willing to pay for that work, then you can shoot me an email. Or if you have a local 4D representative, account manager, then it might be better to first talk to that person rather than to call me directly. Otherwise, sorry, but it's going to have to be a free open source project, which means that I can't make any promises. You can send me some ideas through the other channels, and then I might be able to look into it. Now going back to the professional stuff, then we will typically, what we do is we will try to understand your requirements and then do some research and then maybe create a proof of concept. Up to this point, everything's free. And then at that point, you will be presented with a pricing model. And if both parties agree, then it can be a formal contract. Yeah, that's how it works. We've done this on several instances, actually. So that was what I prepared for, but I've got like 10 minutes to spare, so if there's any questions related to this topic, then I'll be more than happy to take them. Yes, please. Paid plugin. So the question was, what kind of paid plugin have I done? So if I go back to the previous slide, something we did recently was like customization. For example, there is a plugin which allows you to create QR, quick response code in 4D. And that version is open source and is free. I'm trying to this one? No. Q. Yeah. And the thing is, there's an advanced form of QR code, which is an array of QR codes. So rather than the QR code tend to become larger if the encoded text is really long. And there's an alternative form of QR code where you have like 4 or 5 QR codes as an array to represent the same data, but you have some more flexibility with the layout. And that was not in the open source version, but a certain customer needed that for their business application. And then we actually delivered that. And I'm trying to find the example code here. That documents, private projects, no, services. Yeah, that one. There it is. Yeah. So the larger version you could create with the open source version. That was free on GitHub. But the thing is, the customer required the other version, the one where the code is split in 4. So that was customization, and that was delivered for that customer. That's an example. I'm trying to think of another example, but yes. So very simple stuff. Well, so this wasn't very expensive at all, actually. It's like, what was it? 18,800 だから like $180 or something. Yeah, it's really, really affordable. Yes, thank you. Yes, please.
I just want to give a plug for Miyako. I needed a way to get SVG converted to PDFs. We write a lot of now reports. We write them in SVG, and I didn't have a really good way, especially if they have pictures in them, to get them to PDFs. And I mentioned this in the NUG. Within like a day, Miyako threw us together this plugin to do it for me. And we had a couple back and forth, but I mean, this plugin it's core to our business, and we use it all the time. And we just do it together like in 2 days. It's really wonderful. So thank you, Miyako. We use that all the time.
You're welcome. Yes. What else?
How does those 4, the upgrades that?
This one. Yes. Yeah. I didn't know this actually until the customer told me about this. But apparently, most smartphones or any QR code reading devices are aware of this, and you just sequentially read them, and there's a certain embedded signal in each of these images that tell which number. So you can go from 2, 1, 4, 3, or anything, and then it's nicely arranged internally in memory. It's a specific, it's a specification, and yes, very smartly defined. Yes. Yes, please.
So you asked earlier about collaborators for your documentation.
Mm-hmm.
Would that just be doing a git clone and then making the changes locally and then doing a pull request?
You know what? That's the proper way to use GitHub, to file a pull request and become a collaborator. What happens is that, just to explain, on GitHub, if you create an account and log into a particular project, then there's a link where you file what is called a pull request. Then I'll be sent an email telling me that a certain person says they want to collaborate. Then there's no reason to decline, so I would accept. And yes, that would be the proper way to do it. Otherwise, then if another format suits you, then I'm not going to insist on using that convention in particularly. But you're right, yes, that's the right way to use GitHub.
But if you're collaborating, you can't use. I just signed up during the presentation. And it looks like you can't collaborate under the free account.
I don't think so. Myself, I've got 2 accounts, and I collaborate for myself, and those are both 2 free accounts. So I'm not sure what.
Maybe I misunderstood.
I'm supposed to get a notification or something.
Pretty sure the only thing that costs money on GitHub is to have a private repository. Other than that, everything's free.
Oh, that's what it was. Right, that's what it was. It was about private repositories.
Oh, it could be, yes. So open source stuff should be free on GitHub. But again, this presentation wasn't necessarily about educating you about GitHub. It's more like trying to compensate for the lack of information regarding what's been going on for the past few years related to these shared resources, and hopefully shed some insight on how these things work. Yes, please.
Just a quick, yeah, I did notice on your list that your zip plugin was listed in that extensive page, but it's a fantastic thing that I've used, so I don't know why it wasn't in your PDF.
Yes. So plugins are updated quite frequently, so it would be great if you could. I try to communicate some important updates through multiple channels, including the NUG, but some information do get slipped unintentionally. That your point about the zip plugin could be an example of such. One thing is that I noticed that recently when I posted something about this plugin, so on the PDF you'll see an icon for plugins that are require caution. Maybe they might be deprecated, there might be some limitations. This one was a collection of really unrelated functions. So some time ago, I decided to split them into several plugins, like the crypto, the zip, curl, and also JSON. And it's really important to know that the JSON functions, I think I can say this, on this plugin has a serious memory leak. And that's been corrected for the JSON version, but because this is like, I'm not maintaining this repository anymore, I couldn't, well, actually, I didn't integrate that fix on this plugin. So if you're using the JSON functions, again, I didn't think it was important because JSON is now natively available in 4D since v14. So, but anyway, yeah, those kind of information things could happen. So if you have a project that's dependent on one or more plugins that you've downloaded from this repository, then perhaps even if you don't intend to collaborate or push code to the repository, maybe you might just want to follow and then receive some updates about the activity. But yes. And I think the zip function has been enhanced since it's been branched from this plugin. I don't think the progress bar feature was available in this edition, but now the zip. And there's some encryption added. I think I added like 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Will you be making a zip off Cocoa compatible?
Is it not already? Let's see.
On that PDF it said it wasn't.
On the OAuth version, that's true. I think this single version is, it doesn't say. A good indicator would be if you could go inside the folder, and if you see a V11 folder, that implies that the plugin is Cocoa ready. I wouldn't, this particular layout is since I've started supporting 64-bit on Mac. So just the existence of this folder tells you that it's 64-bit ready, actually. There is a way to find out manually. I can just show you, which is that, so we're talking about the zip plugin, which is somewhere around here. Like I said, because there is a V11 folder, I can assume that it supports Cocoa, but if I'm unsure, I can actually go inside the package and then locate the macOS folder and then use a command line command called file, and then that tells me that it's a universal binary containing 64-bit code and 32-bit code. So that's a definitive way to find out if a plugin supports. Again, well, you could just open it with 64-bit 4D. So I think I'm out of time. So thank you for your attention.